fact, most people haven't heard it. And the way I came to be sort of sitting here with you, Miles, goes back to, in fact, well, goes back my whole life, but specifically to July 11th, 2010, when I was living in the state of Maine in the United States. Obviously, I'm an American. And with my family.
You're not Canadian?
I'm not Canadian, no. I am from the American Southwest, actually, which is really sort of germinal to my own personal story. But this particular day, I was living in Seacoast, Maine, in a little village, and my mother had come to be near the grandchildren because they were all growing up, and she'd been there for about a year. And it was July 11th, was a very beautiful sunny Sunday morning in Maine, and she got up and she was walking to church, which was about a block and a half from her flat, from where she lived. And she had just about reached the other side of Main Street, which is, we call that the High Street here, a very small town, when she was actually run over by a van, a minivan, and thrown God knows how far, 20 years. At that point in time, my mother was 74 years old. She was definitely, you know, in the latter moments of her life, in her lifespan. Anyway, just about every bone in her body was broken, and she was conscious, believe it or not, taken to the hospital. I joined her there, and she died in my arms a few hours later. So, one would have thought that that alone is just a tragedy and a horrific thing to have happen in your life, and of course it is. And, you know, one would have been, the natural thing would have been to just receive that as a crazy accident, a meaningless end of someone's life, although I don't believe anything is an accident or meaningless or without purpose. But the reality is, as the months went by, I could not get any information about my mother's death, and that made no sense at all, because it was a small town. She was a little old lady who was crossing the street, and she was run over and killed. And I was the sole survivor. I literally had to have an attorney write a letter to the local police authority invoking the Freedom of Information Act to get even the smallest police report. It made no sense whatsoever. So this really started me thinking something that had been in my guts to begin with this death. And that was that although my mother had started her life as a music teacher, she had halfway through begun to work for the U.S. government, specifically the military. First the Office of Reclamation in Nevada, and then the U.S. Navy. She worked for weapons entities in Dahlgren, Virginia, and then she was transferred to London. She got a position at the Office of Naval Research here in London, which is a very serious organization in terms of the Navy. People think the NSA is the top dog in the world, but it's not. It's the U.S. Navy. Yeah. The Navy is very much
the senior service.
The senior spook service.
A lot longer.
You better believe it. And that's where it all starts, and that's where it all goes down, and it trickles down from the Navy. She was the editor of something called the Fact Sheet for 3 years, 1989, 90, and 91. She had a fairly high security clearance. I mean, she saw all in this office were Eastern Bloc scientists, some Western scientists, lots of Operation Paperclip scientists, okay, working on weapons, working on atmospheric weapons, electromagnetics, psychology, scalar weapons, you better believe it, all of that stuff. Now, obviously my mother was not a scientist, but she was also a very intelligent woman. And so even though she may not have understood everything that came across her desk, she certainly understood enough of it that the only thing she ever told me about what she saw was that a lot of it scared the hell out of her. That's all she could ever tell me. Okay. So this was 89, 90, and 91. This is what I'm thinking. And then when she retired, she went back to Dahlgren after they eliminated that position in London and worked for surface weapons there for the Navy. And then she retired at the age of 60, moved to Hawaii, and started working with independent contractors. And in Hawaii, that's a huge, huge, huge business. It is their primary business. Tourism is nothing compared to the government contracts business in Hawaii. Anyway, she was a technical editor for several companies who were trying to get business with DARPA, another very, very, very black entity in the United States.
Yeah.
Their funding is endless. It's bottomless. So I have to assume, and always had to assume, that my mother saw lots and lots and lots of things. And so here was this little old lady who had been killed for seemingly no reason. Several other people had stopped, and she was almost across the street, and then boom, she was dead. So, you know, this, because I was trying to get over the actual event, because it really manhandled the entire town, this event. A lot of people saw it. I just kind of lived with that for a while. And then, you know what happened, Miles? December 31st, 2010, John Wheeler was killed in D.C. Do you remember that?
Yeah, no, but remind me.
Well, he was the fellow who supposedly was responsible for getting the Vietnam War Memorial erected, but he was working as an independent contractor for the government. He was a liaison between the Pentagon and some really serious. He was also an advisor, probably a security advisor. I'm trying to remember 3 presidents, and they found the guy in a dumpster. Do you remember this?
No. But
well, they did. They found him in a dumpster.
For the sake of argument,
yeah.
just tell the audience about it.
December 31st, they found this guy in a dumpster. He was a West Point graduate. I mean, his credentials were impeccable. Most surely he was working for Alphabet Operations. There's no, I mean, one would expect a man like him to be working for all kinds of people like that. But it was so random and so jarring that this had happened, that it really reminded me of my mom. And it's not that I thought they knew each other. That's not what I mean at all. It's just that it took me back to this idea that civilians working for the military could just potentially be expendable. Yeah? Okay, so I'm thinking about that on December 31st, 2010. And then the next day, January 1st, 2011, is the day all the birds started falling from the sky in Arkansas. And the fish God knows how long that was actually happening, but this is when it came to our attention. Tens of thousands of birds fell out of the sky the next day in Arkansas, and all the fish started washing up on the shores. Yeah,
which is happening now.
Which has been happening daily. I mean, I've seen lists of what's still going on. It's incredible what's going on. So, what that made me think of was electromagnetic weapons, atmospheric weapons, you know. And when they tried to describe what had happened to these birds, there were no outside wounds. They were all internal organs having sort of burst. And I mean, this is a different form of weaponry, yeah. And this brought me back to thinking, wondering what my mother had seen, and if it was possible that she had, you know, it had been convenient to remove somebody who, by the way, by that point in her life, could not even remember her own Social Security number. She was, you know. However, one of the people that I worked with later on, about a year after I started writing the book, and when the book was published, and I was trying to get some attention for it in the United States, that would be The Sun Thief, was Gordon Duff. I know Duff's embroiled in his own stuff right now, but at the time, which was almost 2 years ago, I contacted him and asked him about the situation, because thinking he might be able to shed some light on it, you know. And the one thing he did say to me was, you know, this happens more often than you can possibly imagine. Civilians working for the government are expendable.
Well, they need to be tidied up.
Yes, I mean, the loose ends need to be cleaned up. Now, having said all of this so far to you, and there's lots to say, can I tell you, Miles, that I have direct evidence that she was killed? Nope. But I've got a mountain of circumstantial evidence, yeah? So I can't say that I have absolute direct proof, no. I only have this. The book that I started to write was 2 things, okay? First of all, no, let me just preface this by saying my mother and I believe this is part of why we came here. Okay? My mother was a certain kind of person, in the sense that she was an entity that was written upon, if that makes any sense. My mother and I say this in all sincerity, sort of came to this planet like a code and decoder ring in the same cereal box in a way. She had all of this written upon her life, and she knew damn well that I would write a book, that I would see it, that I would decode it, and that I would put it in a book and start that chapter of revelation. And maybe it would only be a personal revelation, but I don't think that's true. I think that these books are actually meant to go out into the world. Okay, so having said that, oh gosh, what was I?
About the books?
Yeah. Oh, writing the book, yeah. There were two things I wanted to do once
Sun Stealer.
The Sun Thief.
Sun Thief.
Sun Thief. I know Miles will hold that up. Anyway, that's the Sun Thief. Things happened to me while I was writing this book, you can imagine. Two things I wanted to do was try to figure out how it was that she could have gotten herself into that kind of a position. And I knew I could recall that if I tried. By going through some of the history and remembering some of the things. Most of the conversations in here between Christina and her mother are verbatim. And all of the memories that I've put in here are verbatim, because to me, this is the path that led. So there's that aspect of it. The other aspect of it was, once I started writing this book, Miles, who was middle America, clueless, just raising my children, and part of the dream, and I don't mean the American dream, I mean the trance, part of the trance. All of a sudden, I know about chemtrails, and I know about the Air Force wanting to own the weather by 2020. All of these things, because they're out there, readily available if you're researching it, and they come at you like a flood. All you have to do is pull one little thread, and they come, yeah? And there's a reason for that, too. So I'm starting to learn all of these things, at the same time trying to figure out what really happened to my mother, at the same time not wanting to write a book that was gloom and doom. I don't like to write books that are hand-wringing. I like to write books. I like to write books that have to do with solutions and possibilities and, positive, enabling, remembering who we are kinds of books, if I can steal that phrase from someone famous. So while I was trying to write this book, I was driving my mother's car, and someone pulled up beside us and tried to run me into oncoming traffic. My steering went out. I couldn't get any information about her death. The fellow who ran her over pled guilty to manslaughter in the United States, which is what happens when you run someone down with a car and they die. But avoided being sentenced like 6 times. And then in the end had a stroke, and they dismissed the case. Okay? So he's not in jail, and the case isn't even active anymore. And
he may have a miraculous recovery.
He may have a miraculous recovery, But at that point, when that kind of thing started to happen, I just had to let go of that, because, that's just not anything I can control. But these are the things that happened, okay? And then, lo and behold, on March 31st, 2012, which was the day that I finished writing The Sun Thief, which was in my computer in a little thumb drive in my bedroom, my house burned to the ground. That started just about midnight into the next day. They say it was electrical. I have to say, there's a coincidence, because, this is the mountain of circumstantial evidence I'm talking about, yeah?
What about the book?
I got it on. I ran back into the house to get the thumb drive, because I thought, if you think I'm leaving that book in there, you're absolutely out of your mind. 2 of my children were not there that night, which is great.
If you're really, really pushed, a computer,
yeah,
it can melt all around the hard disk. You can't recover it.
You can? Okay. Well, anyway,
because the disk is made at a much higher temperature than the metal when it melts around it.
Yeah. The fire on the top floor was so hot that it melted a treadmill that was up there. I mean, it melted it into the... I don't know. Do fires always get that hot? I have no experience with house fires. Anyway, my youngest son was sleeping up there with a friend of his. My ex-husband got him out. We got the dogs out. We got the cats out. I got my thumb drive, and we went on with our lives, essentially. But, and there are things that happened to me but only when I'm in the United States, interestingly enough. When I go back to visit my children, I'm often strafed by, sitting in my office working, I'm often strafed by small planes right outside my window, close enough to see, the person who's, it's always made known to me. Yeah.
See, I have a basic problem with that. That's very expensive, and it's using the same with the black helicopters and things.
Well, this was a little.
If that's a projection.
Well, I don't know.
A projection issue.
Okay. Well, it's an interesting thought, because all they really need to do is mess with me. They don't have to use actual hardware, do they? They just have to mess with me, right?
It's a black helicopter thing flying over your house and things like that. I can't see how they would expend a budget doing that.
Why they would care about? Yeah, exactly. This is always the question, because it has to be in here somewhere. I don't know what it is. I don't. My job was to get it out. Yeah. And I did. And my mother's been with me the whole time. Exactly. My mom's been with me the whole time on this. There are times I was sitting, I will tell you that it took me till last February, probably, February 2014 or so, January, to realize that she's mentioned black goo in here. I had no idea, because I didn't know what it was. All I did was write down this vision.
Okay, what do you know about black goo?
What I know about black goo now comes from watching David Griffin, to begin with, talk about the Falklands. And that was astonishing. And let me tell you something, Miles, because that goes right back to my mother's death. Let me tell you why. And this is how this operates for me, okay? My understanding of what Griffin was talking about was that there were, every nuclear sub in the United States was in the Gulf of Mexico that summer?
No, everybody who had a nuclear submarine, who had a navy, was there.
Yeah, they were all there. The day that the French submarine, came to the surface with the dying sailors, that day was the day my mother was run over, July 11th, 2010. Okay? This is how it comes to me. All right? I didn't know that until I heard Griffin's, I think it was on your show.
Yes.
Yeah? And this business here where she was sitting, I'll tell you the vision that's in here. She was sitting in a government office, and I don't know to this day whether it was Virginia or London. I think might have been Virginia. She was sitting at a long table, and there was a sink as sort of maybe a break room, like an employee break room, but not a very fancy one. And she was doing two things she never does. She's smoking a cigarette, never smoked. And she was eating a caramel, like a Brock's caramel. You remember those where you unwrap the, yeah? Two things she never did. And as she was sitting there, she pushes this paper across the table, and on top, it's marked top secret. And I don't know what was on it. I have no idea what was on it. I just know that it said top secret. So this is what she's telling me. And then as she's doing this, up through the sink and down through the walls comes this viscous fluid covering everything. This is just a vision. And I knew I needed to, didn't know what the hell it meant. I just put it in here.
That would be the sentient fluid communicating, possibly.
All right, so here it comes, yeah? And there was no way to describe what it looked like, except that it sort of looked like antifreeze. It's that sort of, Well,
it's only just known as black because it's in oil.
Yeah.
Crude oil.
So, and she said in that vision, I tried to stop them. Now, I don't know. I don't know who was talking. I don't know. But this is how it works for me. Then, when I said, it looks like antifreeze to me, that's the only way I can describe it. Then I watched Griffin's interview on your bases. And he said, did he not say that the code name for this stuff was antifreeze? When it's at, yes. It was him or something. I think it was him. We'll have to ask him, right? When it's at active temperature.
Yeah, that was the thing. When
it's called.
They call it Arctic. It was at a relatively safe temperature, but when they brought it back to the UK, or then they brought it up to a much more active temperature. Once it comes up to normal.
But somebody calls it antifreeze. Whether it's a code name for it when it's active.
It would be. a way of conveying that term without using the term sentient fluid.
So I'm sitting at the People's Voice where I was working at the time, in Ike's office, David Ike's office, when I realized this. So I had a conversation with him about it. And there was, that's just sort of neither here nor there, but that's where I was when I realized.
What did he have to say? Did he have anything to add to the
Nope.
conversation, or was it an obfuscacious conversation?
It was. He didn't have anything to add to it. He was just sort of listening to me, because I was sort of at that moment I was like, ugh, a bit like, oh my gosh, who's around here? Who's here that I can say these words to? Who's not going to think I'm only? You know what I mean? I needed, and Ike was the only one, so. I said, okay, sit down, David.
Respond with a listening of this is informed of what I'm saying, or was he searching because the goo may be here to prevent the agenda of certain individuals?
Well, I felt like he was listening to me, if that's what you mean.
Yeah.
Yeah, in that particular conversation, he didn't have anything to add to it, but yeah.
We're just listening.
Yeah, just listening to me, and maybe like, oh, okay, God, she needs to say this. Do you know what I mean? That kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So, but it's just interesting because I remember where I was when I realized that it was in this book. So see, she never told me what she was working on. She couldn't, right?
Well,
but
she was obeying her vows.
She couldn't.
Being a loyal citizen and doing that.
Absolutely, she never did. I think she knew she was going to die by vehicle. I will say that.
In the same way that nobody retires.
Exactly. 6 months before she was hit by a car, she went into the local police department. She used to call them the cop shops.
Yes.
And because she was irritated because no one stopped for pedestrians in this town. So in the town we lived in. So she went in there and she collared whoever was on duty, and she said to them, "Look, I know this isn't going to do me any good, but I just want you to know that someone's going to get killed in this town. They're going to get run over. Because no one stops for any pedestrians." And 6 months later, she was run over and killed. So, and when I would drive her around in Maine, she would react inordinately to sort of, you get traffic, cars, they do things, they make sudden moves. There's always near misses and things like that.
Do you think she had a precognition of her own passing?
Probably, yeah. I think she did. She knew that it was going to be like that. So, so the other thing I wanted to do with this book, because it's a very, very important part of this book, is once I understood what it was that I was writing about, I wanted to write an ending. I wanted to write a good ending, Miles. And my sense was, my friend Harold Kautzvella, who worked on me with this, well, both of these books really, but primarily with this new book, says we don't write fiction. And I think he's right. I think we don't write fiction. It comes and we put it down. It's my hope, it is my hope, and it is my belief that the chemtrails situation will implode. It will, when it finally does unravel, it will be from the inside. It will be perhaps a pilot who manages to get out, or something along those lines. I can't believe at this point, at this juncture in all of the decades that this has been going on, that hasn't been attempted.
Maybe.
Probably many, many, many times.
Well, what in essence are the chemtrails then?
Well, okay, there are lots of things, aren't they? Esoterically speaking, they're severing us from the sun, the seed, the earth, all of those things that we are, because it boils down to what a human being is. So on its base level, it's getting between us and who we are, what we're connected to.
This is very important.
It is very important, indeed.
Of the sun.
Yes. It's getting between us and the sun primarily. Now, ultimately it can't because of who we are. But it's a really, really, really strong attempt to sever us from that which will help us to reach the next level. That is my absolute opinion on what it is esoterically.
Because this is important, because the kind of wars and battles we're dealing with are, they will do things which affect this domain, and it doesn't really mean too much, but there is actually something else that they're dealing with.
Yeah, that's other stuff. That's other stuff, which is huge and important, and overwhelming and an avalanche and all of those things, essentially meant to discombobulate us completely, throw us off, to devolve us if possible, if that's even possible. But I think chemtrails were started. I think the chemicals in the sky were started to get between us and the sun. Changing seeds, poisoning the ground,
Yes.
all of these things, we're connected to Sophia. I've heard some people lately discuss on your show this idea that the Earth is the jewel in the crown. It's not. It may be. We may be able to look at it as a prison planet. I suppose we could, and in some ways it is, because we don't know how we've been enslaved. But essentially, what's under all of that is that we are hugely important.
Yes.
We are hugely important, and that is something that came to me from this third book that I've written, Dangerous Imagination, Silent Assimilation. And that also was triggered, writing that book was triggered through an event that I went through at the People's Voice again. It was a great, I guess, experience for me. I don't know. I was being interviewed by Richie Allen. And he was
wonderful that with all the problems that the People's Voice had, and of course all the agendas and things, you have these positive things.
There are lots of people doing good work still that came through it.
Without any kind of conspiracy needing to be involved. TV stations and these kind of media things do fail for many managerial reasons. So I mean, there's whilst I feel that there were conspirators in there to shut it down, and
almost
which is no
always
big deal. You know, David Icke going to have a TV station. Oh,
yeah,
maybe
there's
somebody
9 out of
would not
10
like
are
that.
going to be planted. Yeah,
So
absolutely.
It's a case of
Absolutely, I
probably
watched
find
it.
There were more alphabet
I
agencies
was-
in there than there were.
Yeah. I was part of that until we were down to half a dozen people in the office every day. I mean, and I still knew we were infiltrated, and so did Ike. I told him that, and he said, "Of course we are." I mean, this is just the
It
given.
was good fun with the people on the tube. I knew I was being followed on the tube.
Oh yeah,
2 people on the tube, and it's just
it's crazy.
it was good fun.
But anyway, so listen, Richie Allen did interview me. I was working, actually, I began there working for Richie Allen as a researcher, but first 2 questions he asked me were the usual ones. What's the difference between a chemtrail and a contrail? Yeah, okay, fair enough, if you're just now hearing about this.
Well, I think it's still a lot of people still aren't up to speed
fair
on this.
enough,
And
fair enough.
So I think it's worth covering that ground.
Yep, and too many people would have to know about it for this to be happening. Those 2 things are the first things that come up.
The same arguments about
It's a
the moon
meme.
landing,
It's
the
a
moon
hamster
landing.
wheel.
Yeah.
It's on purpose. It's one of millions and millions and millions of mental hamster wheels that have been developed and overlaid on us that we can't get off till we know we're on them. And I did not know that until that moment when he was interviewing me, and it hit me, and I thought, there it is. There it is. There it is. There's one of the memes, I guess you would. Meme is not a word I use very often. So if it seems imprecise to you, stop me. But this hamster wheel, yeah? I thought, there it is. Why? Why can't we get past that? Why? So wanting to know why we can't get past that led me to write this book, Dangerous Imagination, Silent Assimilation. And what this ended up being was a discussion of the 20th century. Now, social engineering leading to cultural revolution, particularly aimed at Western civilization. All right, this is the subtitle of what we could title the 20th century, the stolen century. Okay, with subtitle social engineering that leading to cultural revolution and the hopeful overthrow of Western civilization. Okay, and we don't need any more than that, Miles, and here's why. If we really start looking into every aspect of what my partner and I wrote about in this book, we could go back eons and eons and eons and eons. And that people just, they turn off, they shut down. It gets too hard and too long. It's pointless. There's no point in bringing that unless I want to show you just how smart I am. And I couldn't care less. If we take the 20th century, that is enough, I think, to use as a crowbar to get a bit of light into the system and really start the whole thing crumbling. And the 20th century alone is enough to overwhelm you. It is. The only thing that I needed to do when I was writing this book that went back a little bit further was go to about the beginning of the 18th century, and I found that out when I initially encountered this thing called the Prussian education system. Because let me tell you out there, the schools, that's how they have us. The schools is how they have us, and that is one way in which it was. A deep and desperate, dark desire of what I can only call the predator.
This predator.
The predator.
The predator that we have.
To overcome us, to enslave us, to really get us physically. The way they were able to do that in the end was through our schooling. It's not education. Schools are what fish swim in all together as a unit with no mind. This is a school. It's not education. It has nothing to do with education. And it's been proposed before. I think Plato wrote that every child should be schooled from the age of 3 to be of the best use to the state. Pretty simple, yeah? That idea has been around forever. Calvin thought that was the case. Who else? Fichte, he was important. In Germany, he wrote Address to the German Nation right after the Battle of Jena when Napoleon kicked Prussia's, you know what?
Yeah.
Well, that was a shock in Europe because Prussia maintained a standing army. They were like the thugs of Europe. You know, nobody could defeat Prussia. And here's Napoleon with this unprofessional, completely amateur army, and they were defeated. And my understanding is it was because some of the soldiers on the Prussian front lines had the great good sense to turn around and go home. They didn't want to die.
What made them?
I don't know.
That?
I have no idea. Well, that's a good question, isn't it? What made it? What this individual decision making? You know, that's come more and more to the forefront, particularly in my country, the United States, which is our forecastle. It's kind of in our bones, which is one of the reasons they're trying as hard as they can to eliminate the United States. They have to get rid of us, or they can't win if they don't bring us to our knees. So, or make us obey and comply. I guess that's the best way to put that. But yeah, so the King of Prussia at that time, I believe, was Frederick II. Anyway, you have to understand that Prussia is a synthetic entity anyway. It's a collection of 171 German principalities that was brought together over time by the Teutonic Knights, which is a Templar order. Yeah.
I mean, Germany, the Federal Republic today is...
It's Prussia.
Yeah.
It's Prussia is what it is. The greater German state is essentially what the Teutonic Knights brought together and called Prussia.
And that's what Hitler was trying to reassemble.
Exactly. And actually, Prussia, we should talk about this at another time because I don't have the facts at my fingertips right now, but Prussia is actually a major card in the game with Putin in the Ukraine as well. You may know this already, but it has to do with with Prussia never having signed perhaps an ally treaty or a peace treaty. There's some out for Prussia, and it has to do with Putin. It has to do with Russia being able to absorb Prussia in some way or activate Prussia in some way. Anyway, I don't want to say too much.
Are you saying that there was not a surrender agreement between Germany and Russia?
And Prussia or Russia. I'm not sure. There's no surrender agreement. Well, there's no peace treaty between Germany and anyone, except I think it's one tiny little state. I can't even remember.
World War II,
technically, we're still at war with Germany, absolutely. Yeah. But let's not. I'm going to digress.
That's what paperclip and all that.
Yeah. I'm going to digress anyway. I just wanted to mention that for further discussion because Prussia is still a player today in the situation with Russia and the Ukraine. So one of the things that happened in 1806, right in there, was Johann Fichte, who was a very prominent philosopher in Germany, made this very famous speech to the entire German nation called Address to the German Nation. And in it, he stated things like, obviously, the German children could no longer be trusted with their parents because, these sorts of things were happening. Prussian soldiers were surrendering on the front lines when in fact it was really the greatest good you could do as a human being to die for your leader and all of these sorts of things. And so an education system was developed in Prussia to warehouse children. They were taken away from their families at very early, very young, very tender, very impressionable. Well, kindergarten was invented at that point, and it was subsidized by the Prussian government, yes, but probably...
Which is why we call it kindergarten.
This is why we call it kindergarten.
It's a German word.
But I think that they were thinking more in terms of age 6 or 7 through 16 or so. And the education system that was developed and that is in place pretty much globally now has to do with creating obedient servants and people who will die for their country and not ask questions. And at this point in our history, because of some other factors that came into being in the 20th century, these are people who cannot think in context. This is we've been compartmentalized on a global, universal level.
But wasn't this one of the strengths of the German army, that they could think? They lost a commanding officer. They could think, and they could deal individually with the problem.
Perhaps.
Or was that how they were trained in German army? That was part of the...
If that is the case, then it was
or
the
Bavaria, the original German army as opposed to the Nazi side.
I don't know. What is the original German army, though? Is it Prussia or is it...
The old German, the old army was meant to have higher respect of the British army had a more of a closer, respectful link. From what I understand during World War II. Mm-hmm.
It could be. I mean, for me, we're talking 1806 to 1809 here. Yeah. So, and this is for an American, this is new history because we don't get to know these things. Yeah. As you know, that's part of the schooling system. We don't get to know anything that would help us think. Okay, so at this point in time, this education system, which I discuss at length, and actually, thanks to thinking about this interview, I'm actually getting into some more information about that, which actually goes to China, post-revolutionary China, and some other things. But
I've just spoken to somebody this morning who just come back from China, and they're just a total hive mind. It's just complete obedience, no reasoning, complete control.
Yeah. Some of the people in charge of this, whether they were Tavistock or Frankfurt or whether it even matters at this point, including John Dewey, who was a big Fabian socialist and sort of the father of modern education in the United States, spent not a little time in China right after Mao Zedong was able to, because they had a captive population to use as a laboratory for really what amounts to prison school systems. I mean, children are imprisoned in these boxes and indoctrinated in the way that, you know, the government and you know, we say the government, but that's really fairly imprecise. We really shouldn't say the government anymore because, at least in my country in the 20th century, it was the industrialists, yeah, to begin with, and the people who wanted a centralized bank and those sorts of folks who used the Tavistock Institute and the Frankfurt School and all of the things that, you know, all of the entities that grew from that. You know, the TAVI is like 3,000 plus entities now globally. I mean, this is really one part of the octopus. So, but yeah, so John Dewey spent 3 years in China trying to see what it was like to inflict the schooling system on a very confused population. Immediately post-revolution, they had no idea what was going on, right? And they're shocked. Traumatology at its finest, yes? And here comes their idea of school, what they've managed to work out for 100 years, and put that in place and see how that works out in mainland China. So there's a lot more to this than even I knew when I was writing. Although this is not just about education, it's about all kinds of things. But in the case of the United States, well, first of all, backing up just a little bit, the education minister in France was also aware of what the Prussians were doing in terms of creating this schooling system that would create the most compliant citizen and the most useful citizen. And he got very excited about it, and he took it back to France. So it wasn't just Prussia.
Yeah,
it was...
The French really spent a lot of time at school.
Yes, the French took this to heart, took it with them. And then the United States was a bit of a different horse, a horse of a different color, because this idea of sovereignty, I mean, I talk a lot about folk souls, because I think that's what's in the morphic field that they can't destroy, is this folk soul that goes, you know, that's part of our incarnation, that's how we express ourselves. Yeah. I want to say right now a few things so that there's some context around what I'm trying to express here. Let's just talk about first of all how important a human being is and why we're a target and why the predator sees us as desirable. Because otherwise he just would have rampaged through this planet, used it, abused it, and left us, right? There's way more to it than that, than the consumption of this planet. What we have that the schools tried to destroy almost immediately is what we call the imagination. All right? A lot of people are talking about this right now, which makes me really happy. Really happy. In English, you can take that word apart. I-mage in. Mage is magic. Mage is power. Mage is the creative impulse. All right? Magician. Yeah? Imagination is what it really is who we are. We don't know that anymore, but it really is who we are. Imagination with a vehicle, yeah, inside a vehicle. My beliefs, my strong intuition, and my, trying to prove that this is like trying to prove you love somebody. It's difficult. Is that we are the interface. Our imagination, for lack of better words, is the tool we use to materialize things on this on this plane from the morphogenic field. We are the conduit from there, pointing up for some unknown reason, to here. Okay? And it's our imagination that is the tool that makes us co-creators.
Yes.
Yes. Now, we are being predated by an entity who would like to be a creator. It's the only thing that makes sense. The only thing that makes sense is that this power that we have is something that this entity would like to have as well, which is why we see false biology around us all the time.
What do you mean by false biology?
False biology. Well, for example, a computer. False biology. It's an attempt to create a human brain, in my opinion. Yeah.
Well, it's connecting to a cognitive device.
It is.
Which a lot of people are cognizing and focusing into in a network.
Mm-hmm. It is. It was and a poor.
Life creates order, whereas the universe is always decaying at entropy. Mm-hmm. We create negative entropy. So if you control that negative entropy, if you control that order, you can create a new universe for something else, perhaps.
And we can. Human beings can. We can do that. We've always been able to do that. We don't know that anymore.
So by accessing that, you can engineer ourselves out of existence and an environment for something else into existence.
We can do anything, Miles. Yeah. We can do anything.
But if we wake up, we can...
And we are waking up.
We can delete the anomaly or the predator.
We can. And it's also my contention that the predator would like the ability to... But two things. First of all, to destroy our interface, which is why... You know that saying, garbage out, garbage in? Yeah? I think that a lot of garbage is trying to be shoved up through us back into the field. Okay? Which is what all of the... I
hadn't thought of that, actually. That's a good point.
That's my thesis, is that we are this all being shoved to poison the field, if possible. Okay? The question as to whether or not that's actually occurring, I think it may be possible. I think, and I'm not really willing to get into too deeply into why I think that this is true, but I think that there is an intra-dimensional entity that is connected with the Earth very deeply. And no, I'm not talking about anything negative. I'm not talking about the jinn or anything like that. But there is an intra-dimensional race, if you will, who are to the morphogenic field as master dowsers are to sacred water. They are able to recover, clean, I don't know what word to use. Yeah?
Yeah, we're limited by language.
Yeah, we are limited by language in lots of ways. That's also in my book. Anyway, this is my thesis. And So on the one hand, that interface, which is coveted by the predator, they would like to destroy that for lots of reasons. You've already mentioned a few, like if we wake up completely, we can computer and program that thing, like you know how they used to do in Star Trek.
I think Mother Nature,
Sophia,
itself,
yeah. Well, that's
the thing that it must control or kill.
Yeah, and that's where this other intradimensional entity would be found. On the other hand, they want to become that as well. I think they would like to. It's a hell of a power trip. It's when you think if you were an entity that, you know, coveted this idea that you could create life or create. I don't know. Should we use the word hologram? I don't like that word because I think it's better than. I think they create a hologram. We create something much better than that. Yeah. Okay, what we create is much better than that. The best I think they've been able to come up with is trying to figure out how to use us to their own ends. Rather, I mean, when you look at some of the byproducts of technology in the late 20th century, early 21st century, you're looking at, trees, synthetic trees, forests and forests of synthetic trees that don't harbor life, don't produce seeds, can be milled for lumber. But do you know what I'm saying?
Yes.
So this is always my best example of alternative fake biology. Computer's also a good example, wherein this entity is trying to create, but really can't, because they're not human. Yeah. They can't do it. They want to really badly, but they can't do it.
But anything which is not within the mathematical relationship, the harmonic relationship of the numbers, of the constants which exist in our realities, even in the jinn or other beings in different worlds, they all have a relationship. If the fundamentals of the reality which we all coexist in are violated, the whole thing will just fall apart like the string, like wool from a pullover. They just disassemble.
Yeah.
This will affect all realities, which we all are related to harmonically.
But if you're an entity that isn't able to think along those lines, do you know what I mean? That really is just sort of driven to predate. Yeah. You've got none of this business. You've only got get me this. It's this.
The anomaly. It's a predatory anomaly.
Yeah. Yeah. So, important. Turn off your TV. Just turn it off. Okay? I'm going to say that right now. For various reasons, I go into that at length in here. Turn it off. Be very aware of the computer. I think we need to be on the computer because that's how we're actually getting our truth right now. And let's talk about schools, because that's really, really the battlefield.
Yes,
they've got us there.
Always changing. There's two things they're always trying to change: is the health service and the schools.
Get us out of those. Get your kid out of school. Listen, I'm a teacher. I'm a Waldorf teacher. They call it Steiner teacher here in the UK. And I have 3 children, and 2 of them asked me, sort of into their secondary school years, can I quit? I said, yep, you better believe it. Get out of there. Just get out of there. Legally you can quit now, so quit. What's being done to us along those lines, you have to add the behaviorists, which actually by the time we got up to B.F. Skinner, the way the behaviorists taught us to fear. When we fear nothing when we're born, all right, they discovered how easy it was to make us fear. We don't have any fears when we're born. They give us that. Behaviorists going from Pavlov, and whether or not what his agenda was, really I don't know. But his contemporary was John Watson, who did have a very dark agenda, worked for Johns Hopkins University, and he's the one who conducted, in the 20s, I think, experiments on newborns and infants on teaching them how to fear things. How does that actually work?
But that, of course, pulls in all your sort of antennae. It's sort of, if you're afraid, you immediately start not noticing was you're sort of in a survival mode, and
all
then
the time.
that pulls all your energies in. And
All the time. See, this is the distractive part, and we're all talking about this right now, which I think is really good. I mean, this is sort of the obvious part. The non-obvious part is how amazing and how miraculous we are, and what it is they're actually trying to steal from us, which is the imagination, which is this. We need to know that too, because we don't know that. If we don't know that is really how powerful and holy we are, and I mean the word holy, relative to Sophia, the entity we live on, then we can't, what do we do with this? Yeah? Because we have nothing to trust. If we don't remember this, how holy we are, all of this, which can be characterized as the 3D world, debility, dependency, and dread. That came out of the Korean War, okay? The 3Ds, debility, dependency, and dread, beginning with the Tavistock Institute, which created the idea of traumatology and refined it to an art. That's what we're living under right now. Dependency, we can't do anything for ourselves. We can't. We need the state. We need the state mommy and the state daddy.
Well, it's called health and safety, isn't it?
It's health and safety. It's the army. It's, it's, I often describe it as, I wrote an article one time for Veterans Today, trying to describe this idea of my mom she was 9 years old during World War II, and her father had abandoned the family and blah, blah, blah. Sitting in a darkened theater, eating popcorn and watching newsreels, yeah? This is where a child with no father and an absent mother, because she has to go 45 miles to work, gets this replacement. Because what they tried to do is create a vacuum in our children that they can fill, yeah? And by taking things away from us, like the nuclear family, like the sacred feminine, the sacred masculine, both of those under attack, from the turn of the 20th century, the authoritarian father figure was the first thing that the Frankfurt School went after. Okay, vilifying what they call the authoritarian father figure. We don't even know what that means anymore. Authoritarian personalities are people like Dick Cheney, the psychotics that are at the top of the pile. This is an authoritarian. When you see somebody psychopath, it has nothing to do with a nuclear family that has a mom and a dad. Nothing. But the Frankfurt Institute, see, this is what they do when they want to capture a population. They capture their language, and they redefine everything. Yeah? So you don't even know what you're saying anymore.
One of the things which I've noticed about journo speak in news organizations, they can't say a direct phrase that says anything. Mm-hmm. If you ask what day is it, they couldn't say Monday. Or Tuesday.
Right. Indirect, very
they
indirect.
Come up with a specific yes, no.
Very indirect.
And they're in a state of fear.
Yeah, sure. I think all the time journalists. It's hard to even know. Are journalists being threatened? Are journalists in on it? Are journalists... But they're not the fourth estate. They're not doing anything to help us. I'm looking for this list I made in the book about some of the words that were invented by the Tavistock. Let's see if I can find it. I think it's important. Because we're talking about changing... using English against us. English is an amazing, wonderful, malleable, brilliant language, which is why they use it against us, because it's very easy to cast spells with the English language. It's also why they want the whole world to speak English. Now, I can't find it right now. Hopefully, can you edit this if I look for it?
Well, we're actually coming up pretty close to the end of the first hour.
Are we? So shut up.
You could...
I've got lots of things to say about schooling if you want me to.
Yes.
All right. Couple of things I want to say. First of all, Horace Mann brought the Prussian education system and compulsive schooling to the United States in the mid-1850s. And he was not, as we have been led to believe, this angelic educator who only had our best interests at heart. He was actually working for the railroad and coal interests in New England. He was working for the industrialists who knew that they needed a subdued, working force in order to continue to make their profits. And so that's why he was brought in to shove compulsory education down the throats of U.S. citizens. It was never, the first batch of children who were sent to school under that law in Massachusetts had to be marched there by the National Guard because their parents were rioting. All right? We had no intention of going with compulsive schooling. And Horace Mann formed one of the first, if not the first, boards of education in the United States, maybe anywhere, to study this problem of how to make compulsive schooling palatable in the United States. And the governor of Massachusetts at that time was having none of it. And he disbanded the Board of Education and he threw them out lock, stock, and barrel. And this industrialist who had funded their work was given back his money. And no thank you. We see what's going on here. And then they just kept at it. And finally, there was a vote in Massachusetts where by one vote, the Massachusetts legislature enabled the recreation of the Board of Education. By one vote. All right. And that's how the first Board of Education came into being in Massachusetts. It was 16 years before another state swallowed this idea of compulsive education, or compulsory education. The Rockefellers and, was the Rothschilds and the Fords and the Rockefellers actually formed their own Board of Education, believe it or not, in Texas, subsequent to their discovery and funding of some research that was going on at the University of Texas that actually had to do with eugenics. And they realized that not only could they take this new form of education and enslave the human population, but they could also enact a long-term eugenics agenda by doing that. Selecting out in terms of criteria in schools, yeah? So it's also part of the eugenics movement. But there was this fellow, and I have to recommend as well, I do a lot of research via a fellow in the United States called John Taylor Gatto. And John Taylor Gatto is one of the most tremendously informative and activist former teachers in the United States. And he's done tremendous amounts of research into just this thing. If you want to do some more work on this yourself, please look up John Taylor Gatto because he's phenomenal. Also, his grandfather was John Taylor, and I think this is a bit of repaying a debt on Gatto's part because his grandfather is actually the man who invented Taylorism, which was scientific management for the industrialists. And so isn't it interesting that it's his grandson who's trying desperately to take it apart? But anyway,
we're just coming up to the end.
Okay.
You want to just a quick section?
Well, there's lots to say. We don't have to say everything, obviously.
We'll do that.
Yep.
Just after this.
All right.